Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we are going to be talking about issues 19 through 24 of Sleepwalker, which in turn make up the storyline Mindfield. Mindfield was a bit of a turning point for the series in the sense that, one, you had new regular artist Kelly Krantz starting to develop his style, and some of his work was actually pretty good, and some of it was not so good. In fact, it kind of goes into the territory of bad 90s art. But as far as the writing goes, Bob Budiansky, definitely brings a sort of darker tone to the series, and that sort of feeling of fun and games that a lot of the prior issues had, starts to diminish. And as Will Smith said in one of the Bad Boys movies, shit just got real. And so I want to say it was Will Smith who said that, but it may have been Martin Lawrence. But one of the guys in the Bad Boys movies said that. So yeah, shit just got real is kind of the feeling that kind of comes into play with this particular storyline. And so before I get into talking about the actual story, I wanted to show y'all something. So this is the cover for issue 19 of Sleepwalker, and yeah, Sleepwalker looks very pissed off here. And he's got these, bug-like eyes. It's pretty cool. But the thing about this particular issue is that, turn this around, that's right, this cover can double as a mask. So, pretty cool, huh? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's, of the issues being reviewed here, issue 19 is the only one with a gimmick, but I just thought, that was pretty cool. But so the storyline starts off with some familiar faces from way back in issue 7, the Chain Gang, which are a group of criminals who, were basically chained together, and due to a set of strange, cosmic circumstances, as long as they're chained together, each one of them has a certain superpower that they use to commit crimes. But Sleepwalker went up against them during the time that Infinity War was going on, which the cosmic villain Thanos was causing all sorts of havoc throughout the universe, and amongst other things, had used this glove called the Infinity Gauntlet, and had basically wished off half of the population of the universe. And so, amongst other casualties, Rick Sheridan was one of the people who, for a period of time, was blinked out of existence. And so, Sleepwalker had been roaming had been roaming the city without any way to, go back into the home that he'd been making inside of Rick's head. And so, while he's trying to, patrol the city, fight crime and what have you, he also has to contend with, the cosmic side effects of the Infinity War that sort of carry over, into, the whole universe in general. But in this case, planet Earth is being hit really hard, earthquakes, upheaval and what have you. But he's also having to contend with the Chain Gang. And so, kind of out of a move of desperation, he basically exiled them into the Mindscape in these sort of, weird concrete, semi-organic looking, prison blocks, that they were kind of entombed in, with only their heads sticking out. But, he left them there with the intention of coming back to collect them and bring them back into our reality, so that way, he could turn him into the authorities. But he kind of got distracted with, the natural or the cosmically brought on natural disasters that the Infinity War was, causing on, planet Earth. But then things happened during the Infinity War wherein reality was rewritten, and amongst other things, everyone who had, basically been wished out of existence they were brought back into existence with, no memory of ever having disappeared. And, Sleepwalker, once reality is rewritten, finds that, he basically, has no memory of anything that happened, since, everything's basically just been restructured and what have you. But because the Chain Gang was on another plane of existence when this happened, they remember Sleepwalker, even though he doesn't remember fighting them. And so this whole time, they've literally just been forgotten about, and they've been lingering in the Mindscape, being, tormented by all sorts of weird creatures there. But they're freed one day by Cobweb, Sleepwalker's old enemy, who wants to use them to kill Sleepwalker. But initially, they had busted out of their makeshift prison by way of reluctant teamwork. But as they're roaming throughout the Mindscape, that's when they're ambushed by Cobweb, and he basically bends them to his will, to where they agree to follow his orders and try and kill Sleepwalker, because they have no love for Sleepwalker, but at the same time they're scared shitless of him because of all the torment he subjects them to. Sort of like Nightmare on Elm Street levels type of horror, except in a code-approved comic. But anyway, though, basically, Cobweb is able to pinpoint them into, say, a technique to come into our reality. And basically, he starts off by using Rambo, Rick Sheridan's dog, as kind of a portal into our reality. So basically, when Rambo's sleeping, that's when the Chain Gang is able to come into our reality, and they find Rick Sheridan, but before they try and kill him, the plan is basically Rick Sheridan has to bring Sleepwalker into our reality, so that way the Chain Gang can kill him. And so but because of some of the energy that that the Chain Gang are there, like there's a certain level of energy or certain types of energy that members of the Chain Gang are using, and coupled with some of the stuff going on from Cobweb's manipulations of the Mindscape, there are some rather strange side effects. The first of which is Rick Sheridan, while all this is going on, he tries to basically will Sleepwalker to come out of his head, because prior to being accosted by a Chain Gang, Rick and Sleepwalker had a sort of argument, in the Mindscape, or in sort of Rick's head, wherein Sleepwalker's trying to persuade Rick to allow him more freedom, so that way he's not just relying on Rick to fall asleep and to be able to come out and fight crime. And so Rick is very against this idea, because he feels like he's already given up enough of his life to Sleepwalker. And so Sleepwalker's saying, I hope for your sake that you don't come to regret this decision, more or less. And so he's at a point here, fast forward to when the Chain Gang has manifested into our reality, courtesy of a sleeping Rambo, and they're about to try and kill Rick. Rick basically tries to will it to where Sleepwalker comes out of his head without him falling asleep. But because of all this mental energy being thrown around, I mean, you had the Chain Gang's powers, then you have some of the residue from the portal that Cobweb had put together for them. Then you have Rick Sheridan trying to use all his mental energy to bring Sleepwalker out. Well, Sleepwalker does come out of Rick's head, but unfortunately he also merges with Rick to where he kind of looks like, issue 20 here, he's sort of half man, half Sleepwalker. But you got this weird hybrid being wherein they're both each other, and yet they're separate at the same time, in terms of like each one of them, they're both crammed together in one body. And one of the side effects of this is that the power that Sleepwalker normally has is cut in half. And so, he basically gets his ass kicked, by, the chain gang. And, and it's only through, more or less, dumb luck that they're able to, that, Rick and Sleepwalker are able to put up a fight against them. But one of the other things that ends up happening is the chain gang, they go back inside of, they're brought back inside of the Mindscape, and, and Cobweb, is, rather pissed off at them for, failing in their mission, but they're pointing out that, hey, maybe if you put us inside the mind of someone else, like an actual human, then we could avoid the problem with Rambo, because once Rambo woke up, that's when, they were drawn back into the Mindscape. And so Cobweb says, you know what, you guys have a point there. And so after scaring the shit out of him some more, he decides to put them into, the mind of Alyssa, Rick's ex-girlfriend. And so you have her, basically, finding herself wanting to kill Rick, her ex-boyfriend, for reasons she can't quite fathom. But it's mainly because, of the members of the chain gang, trying to, tap into, their own darkness and adding it to, whatever darkness is in her head. But while all this is going on, though, Rick and Sleepwalker, once again, they try to untangle themselves from one another, and they succeed, but, because once again, you got Mindscape shenanigans going on, they succeed in separating, but in a Freaky Friday twist, Sleepwalker has Rick's mind, and Rick has Sleepwalker's mind. And so you have Rick Sheridan, walking around, but you have Sleepwalker walking around in Rick Sheridan's body, and he's basically, acting like he does, but without any sort of powers or anything like that. And so a lot of people are like, what's wrong with Rick? And on the other hand, though, you have Rick in Sleepwalker's mind, who is very unfamiliar with how to use his powers, and he's also talking like, the young adult that he is, which throws some of his Sleepwalker's enemies off, because they're like, why is he talking like a like a punk or something like that, that kind of thing. But Sleepwalker actually does try to help Rick with this. Because, it's still his mind, he's able to, bring Rick, albeit in Sleepwalker form, to the Mindscape, wherein, he's able to, show him how to use the powers. And so at the very least, when Rick is back inside of, when Rick is having to contend with either hostile entities in the Mindscape, or he's having to fight criminals in the real world, he has some idea of what to do. But at the same time that all this is going on, Sleepwalker's old enemy from way back in issue 2, 8-Ball, comes back into the game. And he and Hobgoblin, namely Philip Mackendale, the mercenary who took upon Hobgoblin's identity, make a friendly wager. And I use the term friendly rather loosely. Basically, they, there's this sort of there's this fancy pool trophy that 8-Ball has, and he's basically bragging about how he aced Sleepwalker, and because as far as he's concerned, as far as he knows, he did, because he went up against him, not only back in issue 2, but he fought him when Rick was, but the thing is, he didn't know that what was going on with Sleepwalker. Like, he didn't know that there was certain stuff that was going on with him, to a point where Sleepwalker was mortally wounded, and and one of the things that happened was, one of the things that leads into this whole, Freaky Friday twist is the fact that because of, how badly Sleepwalker was wounded by 8-Ball's mechanisms, he, wasn't able to, I guess you could say, control the nature of, the transference, between him and Rick. And so that's why you got this Freaky Friday twist. But, basically, 8-Ball and Hobgoblin, they make a wager, wherein, Hobgoblin puts up, several millions of dollars, and 8-Ball will put up, the trophy they stole, which is worth the same amount. But the main object, though, is for, one of them to kill Sleepwalker, because 8-Ball is saying that, he aced the guy. But on the other hand, Hobgoblin's like, no, he didn't. I mean, he's still wandering around out there. And so, the two of them, they both try and, take down a Sleepwalker. But 8-Ball starts to notice that Sleepwalker isn't acting like himself. And he's talking like, a punk teenager or something, or at the very least a young adult. And so he's trying to tell Hobgoblin that, hey, something's up here. But Hobgoblin's, thinking that 8-Ball's trying to, stiff him on the prize. And so, Hobgoblin actually, manages to mortally wound Sleepwalker, or I should say Rick, in Sleepwalker's body by way of incapacitating him and slitting his throat. Which, for the series was like, damn. But, after this happens, though, 8-Ball's trying to tell Hobgoblin, dude, that it's not who you think it is, and it's not him. And so, at first, Hobgoblin's thinking 8-Ball's trying to stiff him on this, but after 8-Ball forces Hobgoblin to pay attention, he's trying to explain to him that, hey, he's not acting like he normally does. And as far as his fighting abilities go, I mean, he's way more amateurish than, he was when I last fought him. And so, the two of them, they go to, Sleepwalker, who's bleeding out, and Hobgoblin, forcefully, demands to know, who are you? Are you Sleepwalker? And so Rick, tells them, he says, but he's talking through as Sleepwalker in Sleepwalker's body, but he's saying, my name is Rick Sheridan, please, tell my family what happened to me. Let my family know what happened to me. And so that's when, Hobgoblin believes 8-Ball. And so, 8-Ball says, hey, I just wanted a fair game here. And, if, as far as I'm concerned, this contest isn't even worth it. And Hobgoblin concurs, because, I mean, as much of a scumbag as he is, I mean, if the nature of the bet was to take down Sleepwalker, well, taking out, a kid, a young man who's stuck in Sleepwalker's body, well, that sort of puts a complication on things. And so, basically, he says, that he'll just take take back his money, and 8-Ball can keep the trophy, and they'll meet some other time or something, but as far as some other competition. And 8-Ball, after Hobgoblin leaves, 8-Ball actually, has a slight moment of sympathy for, Sleepwalker, or at the very least, this, kid named Rick, who's in Sleepwalker's body. And, he actually apologizes to him. He says, but, sometimes in the game, if you're in the game, sometimes you lose, kid. Sorry. And he walks off. But, basically, while this is going on, Sleepwalker in Rick's body is, seeing someone, a new girl who, definitely takes a liking to Rick, but, is more than a little confused at his, behavior, in terms of, like, how he's acting and what have you. And also, what with Sleepwalker manifesting around him at certain times. But one of the things that happens though is they're at this club, and Rick or Sleepwalker and Rick's body becomes very soothed by the chaos of the industrial music that's playing at this club. So what's chaotic and intense to us is calm and relaxing to Sleepwalker. And so basically whenever whenever Rick falls asleep, or Sleepwalker goes to sleep, Rick and Sleepwalker's body comes out and what have you, and so vice versa. So you got some crazy stuff like that going on. But as Sleepwalker is in the Mindscape, though, when Rick wakes up, or when Sleepwalker and Rick's body wakes up, Rick and Sleepwalker's body goes back into Rick's head, and as he's wandering around, he's basically convinced that he's dying, but he actually manages to come across Cobweb, who starts to torture him and pit him against all sorts of abominations of the Mindscape. But then when he finds out that he's actually fighting Rick in Sleepwalker's body, he starts to sort of flip out because he's wanting to kill Sleepwalker. But somewhere along the way, though, Rick is met with a group of Sleepwalkers that are trying to hunt down Cobweb, and also trying to find him as a Sleepwalker, and they're claiming that they're friends of his, and they're on a mission for an invasion or something, and he was one of their he was one of the team's leaders. And so Rick at this point he knows that Cobweb means nothing but ill towards him. And so on the other hand, he doesn't know what's going on with this invasion, but he does know that these Sleepwalkers are fighting, trying to fight Cobweb. And so Rick is able to team up with these guys after they've helped him with his throat. They sort of do some makeshift patchwork on him, but he teams up with these guys, and they actually manage to put up a good fight against Cobweb for a certain amount of time, until naturally he sort of goes all Nightmare on Elm Street and all of them, and basically kicks him out of his corner of the Mindscape. But he's taunting Rick with clues as to his new friends, and he says, remember what you've learned about them going forward from here. And so from then on, the final chapter of the story focuses on Rick and Sleepwalker once again going up against the chain gang, and actually managing to defeat them this time by literally breaking the chain that they had. And originally the chain had been damaged to a point where they had to keep it together in a certain way, but because of this not all of them were able to fight as a functioning unit. It had to be like one at a time. But they had initially repaired the chain when they were back in our reality, and also it turned out that they weren't fully able to make Alyssa kill Rick, because a part of her still loved him. And so Sleepwalker in Rick's body actually knocks her out and apologizes for it, but tells her that if I hadn't done anything, then I don't know what unforeseen consequences would have transpired from you killing this body. And so and Alyssa is actually aware of the chain gangs. She's aware that someone is, forcing her to try and kill Rick. And so that's why, she lets Sleepwalker, or Rick, in Sleepwalker's body, knock her out. So, once again, there's another avenue that's been cut, that the chain gang's been cut off from. But, unfortunately, though, they're able to regain control of her later on, and Sleepwalker, or Rick, manages to, follow both. I mean, he manages to, go to this club, to a club where, Sleepwalker and his human body and, his newfound love interest, are at this club, but he also sees that Alyssa's, there as well. And when he sees Alyssa trying to, move in to stab Rick to death, or Sleepwalker and Rick's body to death, Rick, Sleepwalker's body, basically just, springs out, and without really thinking, uses his warp beams on her, which, turns her into this sort of silly putty looking, organic, creature, and it's really hideous. And so everyone's freaking out and everything. And then, Sleepwalker and Rick's body is, telling him, you shouldn't have done that, because, at first, Rick's thinking, oh my God, did I just permanently turn her into this monster? And, Sleepwalker saying no, but oftentimes it irreparably scars, whoever, the warp beams, whenever they hit someone who's alive or, sentient, not only does it temporarily distort their flesh, or their bodies, but at the same time, they're left, permanently scarred mentally. And so that's why, the Sleepwalker was telling him, you never use your warp beams on a living person or a living entity. And so unfortunately Rick found out the hard way, because he was trying to ironically protect Sleepwalker, who was in his own body, who was in, his body, and vice versa. But because of this, though, and the intensity of this trauma, the chain gang is permanently, booted out of Alyssa's head, and, and Sleepwalker and Rick are able to work together, to permanently break the chain that the chain gang has. But they find out, after the chain gang's been defeated, Rick realizes, wait a sec, you're still here, because just, what ends up happening is, they're able to, the way reality's affected by all this, chaos is, the chain gang was in danger of being pulled back into the Mindscape permanently, and so is, Rick and, everyone else that was there. But Sleepwalker is able to, take the chain gang, and throw them out of the Mindscape, and then, once the portal closes, that's when, they have their minds back with one another. Rick has his own mind in his own body, and Sleepwalker has his own mind in his own body. But, they both realize, wait a minute, Rick's awake, but Sleepwalker's still there. What's going on here? And so Sleepwalker, sort of ominously notes that, basically, things are going to be different going forward from here. So yeah, that was, that was kind of a brief, or I guess you could say relatively brief synopsis of the storyline. I'm going to go ahead and give it, 3 stars out of 5, because on one hand, the writing in and of itself wasn't bad, and I liked some of the Freaky Friday aspects of the story, in the sense of, there are some comedic moments of, Sleepwalker being in Rick's body and vice versa. And basically their interactions with, on one hand you got, Rick interacting, or Sleepwalker in Rick's body interacting with, two lovely women who are interested in him, albeit one's trying to kill him, but it's because she's being semi-possessed. And then on the other hand, you have, Rick and Sleepwalker's body, not knowing how to use his powers against, some very dangerous criminals. And so, you have some really funny moments like that. And of course, you have, the really, you kind of have the shocking moment wherein Hobgoblin literally, slits, Sleepwalker's throat. But except it's not Sleepwalker who's dying, it's Rick, because he's in control of Sleepwalker's body. And so, I liked, the 8-ball and Hobgoblin wager going on there, wherein you have, two very different villains, one more comedic and one more, outright demonic, trying to, kill Sleepwalker. But I thought it was ironic, though, that 8-ball was the one who, ultimately was trying to, stop the fight once he realized that, hey, this isn't the guy, we're thinking it is. And I thought that was a nice little moment wherein, like, he doesn't try and, patch, Sleepwalker up or anything like that, but at the same time, when he realizes that it's literally, a kid, in who is in control of Sleepwalker's body, that moment of, regret they had, I thought was a nice touch, because it's like, yeah, he wanted to ace Sleepwalker. He wasn't trying to ace a kid, that kind of thing. But, and of course, the chain gang, I thought that, it was definitely an interesting gimmick that they had. It's like there were 4 members, and each one of them was from a different race, or ethnicity, and they all hated each other, but they literally had to stay chained together in order for their powers to work. And so, seeing them, reluctantly working together resulted in some moments of dark comedy. But at the same time, though, as the story went on, like, there were moments where it's like, okay, you can kind of, I'm not going to say, I don't think I felt sympathy for them, but at the same time, there were moments where I was kind of, I understood, why they were acting the way they did, in the sense that they were being tortured by Cobweb, and basically their whole plan to kill Rick was, a desperation move, because they didn't want to be subjected to that torment, again. So I definitely understood their, say, ruthlessness and their desperation, but I'm not going to say I sympathized with them. But as the story went on, though, their mannerisms started to, kind of grate, like they kind of came across as, goofballs who happen to, like killing people, that kind of thing. Sort of like comedic sociopathy, I guess you could say, except, the way, it was pulled off here felt kind of juvenile, if that makes sense. But I did appreciate the fact that, Bob Budiansky and co, came back and, sort of brought them back, because it's like, reality literally forgot about them, because, they're, shucked away in the Mindscape, which is on a wholly other plane of existence. So I like how they were brought back and used as pawns by Cobweb. And speaking of Cobweb, he's definitely, a villain along the lines of Freddy Krueger, in a sense that he basically, torments and mind rapes his prey. And, for a code-approved book, some of this stuff can be pretty disturbing. But then there were moments, though, where I felt like, they were like, okay, we need to sort of, downplay, this disturbing nature of his, character, and they made him sort of, goofy, I guess you could say. So, I feel like some of the humor worked, but some of the humor didn't work. And so when they were trying to make, Cobweb, sort of, darkly comical, that's where I feel like it was kind of awkward, because Cobweb, when you get right down to it, is a terrifying villain. Considering, the types of torture that, he can come up with just in, his realm, but also, the fact that he's literally a mind rapist. So, yeah. But, also, though, like, some of the elements I felt like, may have been a little too dark for the series, because I'm not trying to sound like a prude, but whenever Alyssa or the other girl were being drawn, the way Kelly Krantz drew them, like, I mean, they looked sexy and all, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I felt like they looked kind of explicitly sexy, if that makes sense. Like, at times they were both very scantily clad, and it's kind of like, okay, I mean, granted, this isn't Playboy or anything, but at the same time, I'm looking at this stuff, I'm like, I'm trying to imagine, what would happen, like, say, a parent, buys a comic for the kid, and the kid's looking at it, and like, whoa, that kind of thing. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not trying to sound like a prude, but just bear in mind that, that sort of gritty 90s aesthetic, carried over into how women, were drawn, as well as guys too. But, but then again, bearing in mind that Rick's supposed to be a college student, it's not outside the realm of possibility for, Rick and his, college age dates to, have some fun, so, but just a slight word of warning there. But, as far as the development of the team of sleepwalkers that Rick comes across in the Mindscape, I thought that element was definitely intriguing, but I feel like if more time had been spent with them than the time that actually was spent, I feel like, maybe they would have been more interesting as a vital plot element, as opposed to, say, I mean, I know they were a plot element that is going to come into play later on in the final arc of the series, but at the same time, the way they're introduced here and the way their presence is, it feels kind of like a side note, a very intriguing side note. The fact that there are other members of Sleepwalker's race, one trying to actively combat Cobweb, but also trying to find him, specifically, and saying that, like, he was a leader of some sort, and he's, not remembering them or anything like that. And obviously, at that point in time, Rick, didn't feel safe, or comfortable telling them that, hey, I'm not who you think I am, that kind of thing. So, he has, just the, ominous note of, their plans for an invasion, that kind of thing. But at the same time, he also knows that, they were allies, at the very least, of Sleepwalker, and so I feel like that their presence in the story would have been stronger if there'd maybe been more focus on them. But at the same time, I mean, it was definitely an interesting element to the story. And also, some of the elements of the Mindscape, I wish, we'd had a little more focus on, because the glimpses that we see of it, what with, Cobweb, tormenting the Chain Gang, or, going after, or tormenting the Chain Gang, or, Rick and Sleepwalker's body, or, going up against, the squad of Sleepwalkers. I mean, you have some, fascinating artwork in terms of, the scenery, but at the same time, though, it's like there's just not enough, to me at least. It felt like if there'd been more focus, I feel like, there would have been a more interesting, arc to the story, I guess, or an interesting, turn to the story, if you will. But it was interesting what we got to see. It's funny because, these elements of the story, of this particular story arc, all of these in their own way, I thought were, good elements of the story. But I feel like, like the Freaky Friday, aspect, I mean, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more of that, because, some of the, moments of their, of Rick and Sleepwalker's, interactions with those around them, albeit in each other's bodies, some of those, moments were really funny. And also, the bit of, before they, swap bodies, the bit where, Rick and Sleepwalker were literally merged into a really freaky looking hybrid. I mean, that could have been played for, Cronenbergian horror, like, David, body horror along the lines of David Cronenberg, like The Fly or Videodrome or something like that. I mean, that would have been cool to see, but unfortunately it's like, it's introduced, and the brief amount of time we do see it, it's fascinating, but then, it's like, onto the Freaky Friday twist, and then, when the Freaky Friday twist happens, I mean, it's, brief, and there are some good moments, but there's not a lot of, focus on, there's enough focus, to where, it's well done on a basic level, but I feel like if there was an individual focus on these separate aspects of the story, one by one, I feel like the storyline in general would have been good as opposed to just, decent. But mainly because of the mixed quality of the artwork, as well as, I guess you could say, the rushed plot developments, of this particular storyline, it's decent as opposed to good, but it's still a worthwhile read, especially if you're, a fan of the Sleepwalker series. And also, I thought it was cool, that they brought 8-Ball back, and I wish that they used him more in the series, because he was definitely one of Sleepwalker's more intriguing foes for sure. But anyway, yeah, so yeah, that's my take on it. 3 stars out of 5. And real quick, I'll just go ahead and show all the cover art. So I already showed y'all, issue 19 with the, cover gimmick. And also showed y'all issue 20, wherein, Sleepwalker and Rick are merged. I like this cover right here. You got Spider-Man in the corner there saying, "Finally, Hobgoblin's trying to kill someone, and it's not me." And so, you got a roided out Sleepwalker going up against Hobgoblin right there. And Chuck Rock, Nintendo game. Also kind of like this cover too, mainly because it's kind of funny. It's like, hope this is a dream. It's not. And yes, this actually does happen in this issue. Rick, in Sleepwalker's body, has the misfortune of having his head hacked off by, a monstrous denizen of the Mindscape, courtesy of Cobweb. So yes, this isn't just a cover gag. This actually does happen in this issue. So, ooh, and yes, Sleepwalker's head just randomly floating there. I like that. It's a nice touch. Then, issue 23. And see, I actually like this cover. It's let's see, I want to make sure. Okay, so it's not done by Kelly Krantz. It's actually done by Art Nichols, but this particular cover I like. There's almost like a Kelly Jones feel to say some of the tendrils and the muscles and what have the shading and what have you. But really good detail, and there's Cobweb looking all menacing and gruesome there. There's Rick and Alyssa, and of course Sleepwalker. And last but not least, issue 24. And so this is where Sleepwalker has, his final showdown with Chain Gang. So yeah, that was Mindfield. Yeah, it's, it was definitely, like I said, a turning point for the series. It wasn't a bad arc at all. I just, I think, it could have been a good arc instead of, a decent arc, had a little bit more focus been, given to certain, elements of the story. Like, if the body swapping had been given a few more issues to, grow, to develop, as well as, I would have liked to have seen more interactions between 8-Ball and Hobgoblin, because it's not often you get a sort of, friendly game of pool, that ends up escalating into trying to kill someone, at least within, a supervillain bar, which is where it all starts. And of course, like I said, the bit about, the squadron of Sleepwalkers, and Rick's interaction with them, I mean, it was fascinating, but it would have been nice if there had been a little more time given to them. So that's why I feel like it's a decent arc, but not an outright good arc, but it's still a worthwhile read. So 3 stars out of 5. Thank you for taking the time to check out my review. You got any questions, comments, please drop a line, let me know. And if you like what you see here, feel free to like and subscribe. So y'all have a good night. Take care. Bye.